My name is Samantha Cole. I'm 35 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon. I work in real estate, though you wouldn't guess it from the small apartment I rent downtown. It's quiet, simple, and mine, the kind of place people overlook. Last Sunday, I drove to my parents' house for dinner. I expected the usual: mom bragging, dad staying silent, and my brother Daniel soaking in the spotlight like he was born to be admired. But that night, something changed. The moment I walked in, I could smell her signature roast and hear her laughter echo through the dining room. Mom, Margaret Cole, was already in full storytelling mode. "Daniel's villa is just breathtaking," she told our relatives, her voice dripping with pride. 4 bedrooms, an indoor pool, and those marble countertops, imported from Italy, of course. The table buzzed with admiration. Daniel leaned back, grinning, while his wife Lydia added, "And wait until you see the chandeliers, custom made in Florence." Everyone laughed softly, their smiles perfectly polished. I stayed quiet, slicing my roast, pretending not to notice how every word was another reminder that I wasn't the golden child. It had always been this way. Daniel shined, I disappeared. Then, Mom turned to me with that syrupy tone she always used before a jab. "Samantha, wouldn't you love to stay at their place sometime? Your apartment is so cozy." There it was, the word she loved to use when she wanted to make me small. Cozy. The table chuckled. Lydia smirked. Dad didn't look up, just kept cutting his meat like it might save him from the silence. Across the table, my Aunt Elaine caught my eye. She didn't say a word, but her expression said everything. "Don't take it this time." So I didn't. I set my fork down gently. The metal clicked against the plate, and the laughter died instantly. I looked straight at Mom, calm and even. "Thanks, Mom," I said. "But I actually own 2 houses right next door to Daniel's villa, and one across the street." The room froze. For a moment, even the clock seemed to stop ticking. Lydia's hand hung mid-air, her wine glass trembling. Daniel's smirk vanished, replaced by a stunned blink. And Mom, for once, couldn't find her words. I leaned back, keeping my voice light. "So, which one would you prefer to stay in?" Nobody laughed now. The silence felt louder than any insult I'd ever heard. Aunt Elaine hid a proud smile behind her napkin. Dad finally looked at me, really looked, as if realizing he'd never seen me before. I didn't need to raise my voice. I'd said enough. In one sentence, I'd torn down decades of condescension. And that was just the beginning. Have you ever had to stand your ground in front of people who always look down on you? Tell me in the comments, because what happened after this dinner will make you wish you'd been there to see it. After that dinner, the silence that followed me home wasn't new. I'd lived with that silence my whole life. It had just never been so obvious before. Growing up in Portland's suburbs, I was the second child, the responsible one. The one who didn't cause trouble, who got good grades, who learned not to expect too much. My brother Daniel was the favorite. Everyone knew it. Even the neighbors joked that Mom talked about him like he was some local celebrity. When I was 10, I came home with a first-place ribbon from the regional science fair. I was so proud I could barely breathe. I ran into the kitchen holding that ribbon like it was gold. Mom was at the table helping Daniel with his math homework. "Look, Mom," I said, waving the ribbon. "I won." She didn't even glance up. "That's nice, sweetheart," she murmured, still staring at Daniel's notebook. "We'll look at it later." Later never came. That same week, Daniel scored 1 basket during his basketball game, won, and Mom baked him a cake with "Our Star" written across it in blue frosting. I stood there watching them celebrate while my ribbon lay forgotten on the counter. That was the first time I understood that no matter what I did, I would never be enough for her. It didn't stop me from trying, though. In middle school, I joined the debate team and practiced until my throat ached. When I won the state finals, my picture was in the paper. Mom didn't show up. She was at Daniel's baseball practice, cheering for him even though he spent the whole game sitting on the bench. I remember lying awake that night, staring at the ceiling, wondering why my best achievements always felt invisible. It wasn't jealousy, it was loneliness, the kind that sinks into your bones. Dad tried, in his quiet way. On nights when I'd go silent at dinner, he'd take me out for ice cream and ask about school. "You're going to do big things, Sam," he'd say softly, like it was a secret he didn't want Mom to hear. I believed him for a while, but what really kept me going was Aunt Elaine. She was different. She didn't treat me like a shadow standing next to Daniel's spotlight. She saw me. One Christmas, when I was 12, she handed me a small wrapped box. Inside was a leather journal. "Write your dreams in here," she told me, squeezing my shoulder. "They're yours, not hers." That night, I started writing. I drew house plans, listed cities I wanted to live in, and scribbled ideas about the kind of life I'd build. I didn't know it then, but that journal would become my blueprint. By high school, I'd stopped trying to compete. Instead, I turned every slight into motivation. When Mom praised Daniel for fixing his bike, I built a birdhouse. When she clapped for his D+ in English, I aced my exams. She didn't notice, but I did. In 10th grade, I organized a fundraiser for a local library that was closing. We raised enough money to keep it open another year. The principal called me on stage to thank me. I looked out into the crowd, scanning for her face. She wasn't there. She was at Daniel's soccer game again. That moment stuck with me. I remember gripping the microphone, forcing a smile as I said, "Thank you," while my stomach twisted. Afterward, I walked home under the streetlights and made a promise to myself that one day I'd succeed so quietly, so completely, that she wouldn't be able to ignore me even if she tried. I stopped chasing her approval and started planning my future. I spent hours at the library reading about business, property, and finance. While Daniel slept in or wasted weekends at parties, I learned how people built wealth from the ground up. Mom thought I was being antisocial. Daniel called me boring. But I didn't care. Every page I read, every note I wrote in that journal was another step toward something real, something I could build that no one could take from me. Years later, when I stood in that dining room and told them about the houses I owned, I wasn't showing off. I was finishing what I started the night Mom ignored my ribbon. That moment wasn't about revenge. It was about finally being seen. And soon, the world, not just my family, would have to see what I'd built. Leaving for college was the first time I felt air in my lungs. I got a full scholarship to Oregon State University, majoring in business with a focus on real estate. Mom cried when Daniel left for college 2 years before me. She barely waved when it was my turn. I remember watching her fade in the rearview mirror as Dad drove me to campus. He told me he was proud. It was the first time I'd heard him say that out loud. College was the start of everything. For the first time, I wasn't Daniel's sister. I was just Samantha, the girl who sat in the front row, who knew every detail about zoning laws and property taxes before the professor finished explaining them. My professors noticed. They picked me to lead group projects, to present in competitions, to represent the department. I didn't waste a single chance. During my junior year, I landed an internship at a small real estate firm in downtown Portland. It wasn't glamorous. I spent hours filing contracts, making coffee runs, answering phones. But I listened. I watched how deals were made. I learned how numbers could turn into opportunity. When most students spent their weekends at parties, I spent mine shadowing property showings. I studied which neighborhoods were growing, which ones were dying, and how timing could turn a simple house into a fortune. After graduation, I didn't rush home. Portland was close enough to visit if I wanted to, but I didn't. I stayed, took a full-time job at the same firm, and saved every penny I could. While my friends were buying cars and celebrating promotions, I was budgeting every dollar. No fancy clothes, no takeout dinners, just rent, food, and a dream. At 24, I made my first big move. A small duplex came on the market. Nothing special, a little run down, but in a growing area. I convinced my boss to let me handle the purchase paperwork myself. I bought it, spent my evenings fixing it up, painting, cleaning, replacing floors, learning by doing. When it was ready, I rented both units. The first month the rent checks came in, I sat on the floor of that duplex and cried. That moment changed everything. That duplex became my first stepping stone. I didn't stop. Every deal taught me more: what to risk, what to walk away from, how to see value where others saw problems. Over the next few years, I bought more properties: a small condo, a townhouse, another duplex. By 28, I owned half a dozen homes, each one carefully chosen, each one paying for the next. And by 30, I had 3 houses in Portland's Crestwood district, the same neighborhood where Daniel's dream villa would eventually rise years later. Those 3 houses were worth over $1.5 million combined, but no one in my family knew. I didn't tell them. I didn't need to. Mom still called sometimes, mostly to brag about Daniel. He just got promoted, she'd say. They're planning a vacation to Europe. Oh, you'd love their new SUV. I'd smile into the phone and say, "That's wonderful, Mom." Then I'd hang up and check my tenant payments. I drove an old car. I wore the same black coat every winter. I stayed invisible by choice, because success meant more when no one expected it. Only one person knew the truth: my best friend from college, Nina. She was a freelance journalist, always chasing stories about local entrepreneurs. One night, over coffee, she stumbled across my name in a property record search. "Wait, Sam, you own this?" she asked, her eyes wide. "3 houses in Crestwood?" I laughed. "It's not as dramatic as it sounds." She shook her head. "Are you kidding? You're sitting on a gold mine. Why are you keeping it secret?" I stirred my coffee, smiling. "Because it's not about them knowing, it's about me knowing." Nina leaned back, studying me like she was seeing someone new. "You're dangerous when you're quiet, you know that?" Maybe she was right, because every quiet year, every silent win, every ignored call from Mom, it all built toward something bigger. I wasn't just building wealth, I was building proof. Proof that I didn't need their approval. Proof that I could stand on my own. And one day, when they finally saw it, when they realized what I'd built, I knew it would shake their world to the core. I just didn't know that day would come sooner than I thought. By the time I turned 35, I had everything under control. My business was steady, my tenants paid on time, and my savings account looked healthier than I ever imagined it would. Life was quiet, predictable, exactly the way I liked it. Until Mom called one afternoon with that same excited tone she always used before delivering bad news disguised as good. "Sunday dinner this week," she said. "Daniel and Lydia have something big to share. You'll come, won't you?" I almost said no. Every dinner at that house ended the same way: Mom praising Daniel, Lydia bragging, and Dad quietly pretending everything was fine. But something in her voice made me pause. It wasn't just excitement. There was something smug under it, so I said yes. When I walked into the house that night, the same old smell of roast and wine filled the air. Mom was glowing, bustling around the dining table. Daniel stood by the fireplace, wearing a blazer that screamed new money, and Lydia was already talking loudly about their gala plans. "You're just in time," Mom said, ushering me to the table. "Daniel was telling us all about their new project." Daniel smiled like a man giving a press conference. "We're hosting a charity gala next month at our villa to raise funds for community education." Mom clapped her hands. "Isn't that wonderful, Samantha? He's doing something meaningful with his success." I forced a polite smile. "That's great, Daniel." But the way she said his success, like it was a shared family trophy, made something inside me tighten. Dinner went on, each course paired with more praise for Daniel and Lydia. Their new car, their planned renovation, their future trips to Italy. I let it roll off me. I'd learned how to sit through these monologues without letting them touch me. Then, halfway through dessert, Mom's tone changed. She put down her fork and folded her hands, her face suddenly serious. "We have an announcement," she said, looking at Daniel and Lydia, then back at me. Dad looked up too, uneasy, but stayed silent. "Your grandfather's trust fund," Mom began. "After careful thought, we've decided it's best for it to go entirely to Daniel and Lydia. They're building a future, a family. It's what your grandfather would have wanted." The words hit like a punch. Years ago, she'd promised that fund would be split between us. It wasn't huge, but it was meant to be a symbol of fairness, something even she couldn't twist. I'd counted on it once, back when I was starting out, scraping together down payments, but I'd let that dream go years ago. Still, hearing it said aloud, that she'd given everything to him, brought back every sting from childhood, every forgotten award, every ignored accomplishment, every time she looked past me. I stared at her. "Mom, you said that fund was for both of us." She waved a hand like it was nothing. "Samantha, you're doing fine. You've always been so independent. Daniel needs it more. He has responsibilities." Daniel smiled faintly, like he'd earned something noble. Lydia added, "We'll use it wisely. Maybe expand the patio or start that guest wing we talked about." Aunt Elaine's fork paused midair, her eyes locked with mine across the table. She didn't say anything, but her expression was clear. "Don't let them do this to you again." I took a breath, steady, calm. My heart was pounding, but my face stayed still. I'd waited my entire life to see them clearly, and now I did. Mom leaned closer. "You should be proud of your brother," she said, like she was offering me a lesson. "He's accomplished so much." I nodded slowly, the corners of my mouth curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Proud?" I said softly. "Sure, let's call it that." The table went quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath before a storm. Dad shifted in his seat, knife scraping against the plate. Aunt Elaine's eyes stayed on me, a flicker of something, pride, warning, both. Mom picked up her wine glass again, convinced the moment had passed. "Now, about the color scheme for the gala." But it hadn't passed. Not for me. That was the moment I decided I was done swallowing her favoritism, her excuses, her rewrites of the truth. I'd built something solid, something real, and I was tired of pretending I was smaller just to make them comfortable. So I let her keep talking about chandeliers and drapes and all the shallow things that defined her world. I smiled, nodded, and waited, because my turn to speak was coming, and when I did, they'd never look at me, or my little apartment, the same way again. The moment Mom said the trust fund would go to Daniel, something in me snapped. It wasn't rage, it wasn't even shock. It was a quiet, cold clarity, the kind that only comes when you've been holding your breath for years. I set my fork down. The sound was small but sharp enough to cut through the noise of clinking glasses and fake laughter. Everyone turned to look at me. Mom tilted her head, her tone still sugar-sweet. "Something wrong, dear?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, my voice calm. "Mom, you said that fund was for both of us." Her smile didn't falter. "Samantha, you're doing fine. You don't need it. Daniel has a family to care for." Across the table, Daniel gave me that same smug look he'd been wearing since we were kids. The one that said, "I win again." I took a breath and exhaled slowly. "You're right," I said. "I don't need it." Mom's smile widened, mistaking restraint for surrender. "Good. I knew you'd understand." "But," I continued, "I do think you should know something before you hand him everything." The laughter and chatter stopped. All eyes were on me now. I reached into my purse, pulled out a brown leather folder, and placed it on the table. It landed with a soft thud that somehow sounded louder than anything else in the room. Daniel frowned. "What's that?" I opened the folder and spread the papers across the table, each one stamped, notarized, official. "These are the deeds," I said, "for the 3 houses I own in Crestwood, 2 right next to your villa and 1 across the street." Mom blinked, her face draining of color. "What are you talking about?" Lydia leaned in, her eyes scanning the documents. "This is fake," she blurted. "You rent that tiny apartment downtown." I smiled. Not cruelly, just evenly. "That apartment is one of mine. I rent it because I prefer simple living. My tenants cover every bill I have. Meanwhile, I hear your mortgage payments have been difficult?" Daniel's face turned red. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" I asked quietly. "You've got 2 loans on that villa. A third if you count the credit line for your so-called renovations." He froze. He hadn't expected me to know that, but I did. I knew every number, every detail. That's what happens when you pay attention, something my family had never bothered to do. Mom tried to regain control. "Samantha, how dare you speak to your brother like that? He's worked hard for everything he has." I let out a short, dry laugh. "Hard work? You paid for his wedding, his first house, his education, and now you're handing him the trust fund. I built everything I have without a dime from you." The room went dead silent. Even Dad looked up this time, his knife suspended halfway to his plate. Auntie Lane broke the silence with a quiet, approving cough, though she kept her eyes on her plate. I looked at Mom, her hands trembling as she tried to form words. You've been keeping this from us?" I met her gaze steadily. "You never asked." I gathered the papers back into the folder, my movements slow and deliberate. "You spent your whole life pretending I was the disappointment. But the truth is, while you were bragging about Daniel's villa, I was buying the ground it stands on." Daniel's chair scraped the floor as he stood up, his voice rising. "You're lying! You're jealous! Just admit it!" I looked at him and smiled faintly. "Jealous? No, Daniel, I'm free. There's a difference." Dad finally spoke, his voice low but steady, the first time I'd heard true conviction in it. "She's right, Margaret. You've treated her unfairly. She doesn't need our money, but she deserves our respect." Mom stared at him like he'd just betrayed her. But the truth was, the betrayal had always been hers. I stood, tucking the folder under my arm. "Keep your trust fund. I don't need it. I don't need any of this." The air was thick, with shame, with truth, with years of things unsaid. I looked at Daniel one last time. "Enjoy your villa," I said softly. "Just remember who owns the block around it." Then I turned toward the door. My hands were steady, my heart strangely light. Behind me, no one spoke. The silence was final. For once, I was the one who decided when the conversation ended. No one followed me when I walked out that night. The door closed behind me with a quiet click, and for the first time in my life, it wasn't me left standing in silence. It was them. The cool Portland air hit my face as I stepped onto the porch. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from release. I'd carried that weight for decades, the need to explain myself, to prove myself, and in one dinner, I finally set it down. I didn't drive straight home. I just walked. The streetlights glowed dimly along the quiet road, and each step felt lighter. For years, I'd been careful, polite, contained, the peacekeeper. Tonight, I'd broken every rule that kept me small. When I reached my car, I took one last look at the house. Inside, the curtains still glowed with warm light, but I knew nothing in there would ever feel warm again. The next morning, my phone lit up with missed calls. 3 from Mom, 2 from Daniel, 1 from Dad. I didn't answer. Mom's voice messages started kind, then turned sharp. "You embarrassed us," one said. "Apologize to your brother," said another. I deleted them all without listening to the end. That week, I went back to my normal routine, checking on tenants, visiting a property under renovation, signing paperwork for my next investment. But something had shifted. Every time I walked into one of my houses, I felt a quiet pride that I'd never let myself feel before. A few nights later, Dad left another message. His voice was softer this time, tired. "You were right, Sam. I should have spoken up years ago. I'm sorry for that, but I'm proud of you." I sat on my couch in the dark, phone in hand, staring at the message icon. For a moment, I almost called him back. But I didn't. It was too soon. He'd stood by in silence for too long, and now I needed my own. Mom kept trying to rewrite what happened. She sent a long text saying I'd overreacted and hurt the family's image. The family's image. That was all she'd ever cared about. Not truth, not fairness, just the illusion of perfection. Daniel posted pictures of his villa on social media a few days later, smiling in front of the pool like nothing had happened. The caption read, "Grateful for what we've built." What we built. The irony almost made me laugh. But I didn't comment. I didn't block him either. I simply scrolled past. Because for once their approval didn't matter. Their noise couldn't reach me anymore. I didn't need them to say I was enough. I already knew it. That night I stood by my window looking out at the city I'd built my life in. The quiet streets, the houses that carried my name on every deed. And I realized something simple and powerful. I didn't win because I proved them wrong. I won because I finally stopped caring if they ever believed I was right. That was the moment I knew I was free. 3 months passed before I heard anything new about Daniel or Mom. Life had gone quiet, beautifully quiet. I was focused on work, on expanding my portfolio, on finally living without that constant hum of family judgment in the background. Then one afternoon, as I was reviewing renovation plans in my office, a text came from Aunt Elaine. "You might want to sit down for this. Daniel and Lydia are in trouble." I froze. For a second, I thought she was joking. But Aunt Elaine didn't joke about things like that. When I called her, her voice was calm but edged with disbelief. "Their mansion's on the market," she said. "Foreclosure. The bank's taking it." I leaned back in my chair, the words settling slowly. "Foreclosure? Already?" She sighed. "They defaulted on their second mortgage. Turns out the trust fund wasn't enough to keep up their lifestyle. They burned through everything." I didn't say anything for a while. Part of me felt vindicated, another part, just tired. Aunt Elaine went on. "They're moving into a one-bedroom rental on the east side. No pool, no imported drapes, just reality. Reality. That word stuck. Later that week, news spread quietly through Portland's real estate circles. Daniel's villa, the one Mom had bragged about endlessly, sold at a loss. His reputation as a successful businessman evaporated overnight. Lydia deleted her social media accounts, probably to hide the humiliation. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even smile. I just felt done. Mom tried to pretend none of it was happening, but I knew better. Aunt Elaine told me she'd been calling Dad every night, blaming him, blaming me, blaming everyone except herself. Dad, for once, didn't take it. He moved out, rented a small condo near downtown. It was long overdue, Aunt Elaine said. Their perfect little family picture had cracked, and all the truth they'd buried finally came spilling out. Meanwhile, I stayed busy. My newest project, a community center renovation, was nearly complete. And with the profits from my last sale, I launched something I'd dreamed about for years. The Horizon Fund, a scholarship program for kids from working-class families who wanted to study business, architecture, or real estate. At the opening ceremony, I stood on a small stage, looking out at 10 high school students and their proud parents. The same kind of kids I used to be, hungry, invisible, underestimated. "This isn't charity," I told them. It's investment, in futures people overlook. They clapped, and I felt something warm spread through me. Not pride, not revenge, something cleaner, peace. A month later, a local magazine wrote an article about my foundation. Tina, my old friend, was the journalist. She made sure the story focused on the work, not my family. I was grateful for that. When the issue came out, I sent Aunt Elaine a copy. She replied with a short message. You did good, kid. You broke the cycle. That night, I sat by my window again, watching the city lights shimmer below. Somewhere out there, Daniel was probably sitting in his small apartment, wondering where it all went wrong. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger, just closure. 6 months after that dinner, the world around me had shifted completely. The people who once made me feel small were now living in the shadows of their own choices. I didn't plan their downfall. They built it themselves, brick by shaky brick, on denial and entitlement. Aunt Elaine was the one who kept me updated, though she never did it with glee. Your mom's alone now, she said one evening over the phone. Your dad moved out for good, signed a lease on that condo downtown, says he's finally breathing again. I was quiet for a moment. And her? She's still blaming everyone but herself, Aunt Elaine sighed. Mostly you. That didn't surprise me. Mom had built her whole life on pretending she was right, admitting she wasn't. That would have required a kind of courage she never had. Meanwhile, Daniel and Lydia were barely scraping by. Their perfect life had evaporated into debt and embarrassment. Friends stopped calling, invitations disappeared. The same people who once fawned over their mansion were now pretending they didn't exist. Aunt Elaine said they'd been seen arguing in a grocery store parking lot, voices raised, faces red. Lydia left him 2 weeks later. She took what little savings remained and disappeared to another city. I didn't feel joy when I heard that, just an odd kind of calm, like watching a storm finally pass after years of thunder. My own life kept moving forward. The Horizon Fund had already given scholarships to its first class of students. I expanded it to include mentorship and workshops, teaching young people how to build wealth, how to own property, how to make independence their armor. At the next event, one of the students, a shy girl named Mariah, hugged me after the ceremony. But "Thank you," she whispered. "You made me believe I can build something that's mine." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Because once, I'd been her, standing in the background, hoping someone would notice I existed. That night, I got another voicemail from Mom. Her voice was thin, strained. "Samantha, maybe we should talk. Things aren't the same here. Your father left. Daniel's not doing well. I'd like to see you." For the first time, she sounded human. Not proud, not defensive, just lost. I listened until the end, then set my phone down. I didn't delete the message this time, but I didn't call back either. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done carrying the weight of her approval. Sometimes, walking away isn't revenge, it's redemption. Weeks later, as spring settled over Portland, I visited one of my rental properties, the one across from Daniel's old house. It was empty now, the once grand villa standing quiet, its windows dark. Weeds crawled through the cracks of its perfect stone walkway. I stood there for a moment, the air soft and still. Then I smiled faintly. Their kingdom had fallen. Mine was still standing, built not from handouts or favoritism, but from every moment they told me I wasn't enough. I turned, locked the gate behind me, and walked away. Because some stories don't end with revenge. They end with peace, and the sound of your own footsteps moving forward.